and welcome to today's side event entitled Strengthening Multilateral Cooperation to Counter Terrorist Use of Improvised Explosive Devices, Advancing Member States' Leaderships to Enhance Prevention and Response Capacities in Eastern Africa. It is my pleasure to moderate this discussion, which is jointly organized by Canada and Kenya in partnership with the United Nations Office of Counter-Terrorism, the Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate, CTED, and the United Nations Mine and Action Service, UNMAS. I would like to acknowledge the generous support of Canada in advancing this initiative. I would like to share with the participants the information that this event is being broadcasted live on UN Web TV, so we are joined by an audience online. Interpretation into French is also available, should you wish to avail yourself that service. Today's event provides an opportunity to reflect on practical findings emerging from national consultations and regional expert meetings conducted in Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda. I'm very glad to acknowledge the presence of all three countries here today. We will hear perspective from member states, regional organizations, and United Nations partners on lessons learned, good practices, and priority actions to strengthen prevention and response efforts. Without further ado, I'm pleased to invite our distinguished speakers to deliver their opening remarks. It is my honor to first give the floor to Mr. Alexander Zuev, Active Under-Secretary General of the United Nations Office of Counter-Terrorism and Executive Director of the United Nations Counter-Terrorism Center, to open this event. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear moderator. Your Excellency Yabesha Reni Manari, Deputy Permanent Representative of Kenya to the United Nations. Ms. Jaya Saraswati, Director of Counter-Terrorism and Anti-Crime Capacity Building Programs, Global Affairs, Canada. Ms. Carmen Cantor, Deputy Executive Director, United Nations Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate. And CTED is our very important and strategic partner, as you all know already. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I am pleased to welcome you to this side event on strengthening multilateral cooperation to counter the terrorist use of improvised explosive devices, also known as IEDs. I would like to thank Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda for their leadership and partnership with UNOCT through the East Africa Initiative to address the terrorist threats posed by IEDs. I wish also to highlight also the generous support of Canada to this initiative and its continued partnership with UNOCT on addressing the use of weapons by terrorists. A partnership to which UNOCT has long associated the Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate, as I already said, and now also we work very closely with United Nations Mine Action Service, and in the spirit of full disclosure, I can tell you, before I moved to my new office 10 months ago, you know, for 8 years, I managed in peacekeeping big office, or Sea office, and UN Mine Action Service was second largest office in my portfolio, so I am very familiar with agenda of mine action and with IEDs challenges and all other things. Well, as you know, IEDs pose a serious threat to international peace and security. Having overseen this service, as I said, I have seen firsthand the devastating human security and development impact of the terrorist use of IEDs, as well as the importance of coordinated and comprehensive responses to this threat. Across regions, they are one of the most frequently used weapons by terrorists, causing mass casualties and undermining stability and development. As highlighted in reports by the Secretary General, terrorist actors continue to adopt the design and the use of IEDs. And also on a personal note, it's not in my official statement, I can tell you, when I visited Leon and met the senior leadership of Interpol, they presented to me the best catalog of all IEDs exist in Interpol. And it was very impressive when they show, but they count right now around 14,000, if I'm not mistaken, as I remember this presentation, you know. And I strongly recommend, if you work with Interpol, you can ask for this information, but also Geneva Center on Humanitarian Demining. They published a booklet. It's shorter, of course. There are not 14,000 IEDs over there, but they cataloged. They cataloged the most frequently used, Across regions, they cause mass casualties and undermining stability and development. Well, as I told you, there is a lot of exploitation of dual-use materials, evolving delivery methods, and emerging technologies. These realities underscore the importance of strengthening national and regional capacities, not only to respond to IEDs incidents, but also to prevent the construction and deployment of these devices in the first place. And it's also not from my statement, but from my personal experience. I can tell. At the same time, we discussed with Interpol, that it's not only most commonly used weapon, but it's very easy to do weapon, because if you go on internet, you can make an AD, maybe not very powerful, but almost from everything and almost everywhere. And for this, you don't need military factories, you don't need sophisticated technologies, you just do it, like in the garage. And because of this, they are very often used, Today's event builds on a series of national capacity consultations conducted earlier this year in East Africa, well as a regional workshop on good practices in countering terrorist use of IEDs. These activities have identified shared challenges and priorities across the region, underscoring the importance of strong multilateral engagement, regional dialogue, and member states' leadership in advancing counter-IED measures. They also demonstrated the commitment of member states to lead regional efforts aimed at the strengthening prevention and response capacities. Well, we are looking forward to hearing directly from member states and definitely from our partners in the African Union Counter-Terrorism Center on all these challenges, but also on good practices and lessons learned from our past activities. And obviously, we would like to hear from you about your national, sub-regional, and regional priorities in this area. Our discussions will encourage a joint reflection on gaps in prevention capacities, information sharing, and operational coordination. At the same time, we will consider how effective practices can be adapted across different regional contexts. These types of exchanges seek to strengthen mutual learning and understanding among stakeholders and support ongoing efforts toward coordinated and sustainable action in line with the global counterterrorism strategy. And as you know, it was just adopted in its ninth edition a few hours ago in the General Assembly hall, and we are very glad to inform you about this. It was an important step forward. But we should also pay attention, special attention to different Security Council resolutions. And I am very proud that in my previous job, one of the first initiatives which we took in the Security Council, it was under the presidency of Bolivia in 2017. For the first time, we had a Security Council discussion on use of mines, including IEDs. It's never happened before, and I'm very proud to remind you, because I was basically initiating, this discussion at the Security Council. Well, for our office, for UNOCT, supporting member states in countering the terrorist use of weapons is a foremost priority, a cornerstone of all our counterterrorism efforts. We definitely look forward to strengthening our existing partnership, but also forging new ones to advance context-specific and sustainable responses to the complex IED threat, and that enhance security and the resilience across East Africa, but also beyond. As you know, IEDs are being used in many regions of the world, and East Africa is not the only place where we face this challenge. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention. And with all my apologies, I already informed my co-chairs. In 5 minutes, I should open another side event next door in conference room 12, so I have to leave. Sorry about this, but it's busy time for my office, as you may imagine. I mean, you know. Thank you again for coming, and I wish you all the best in your discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zuya, for your opening remarks and for highlighting the importance of multilateral cooperation in addressing the threat posed by IEDs. I now invite Ms. Carmen Cantor, Deputy Executive Director of CTED, to deliver her remarks. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you, Moderator. Excellencies, distinguished participants and partners, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to join this important discussion on strengthening multilateral cooperation to counter terrorist use of improvised explosive devices, IEDs, in Eastern Africa. At the outset, I extend my sincere appreciation to our partner entities, UNOCT and UNMAS. I also thank our organizers, the Government of Canada and the Government of Kenya, for their leadership in advancing this initiative. I also commend Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda for their commitment as beneficiaries. The terrorist use of IEDs continues to pose a serious threat to international peace and security. Security Council Resolution 1373 from 2001 requires member states to prevent and suppress support for terrorism, including stopping the supply of weapons to terrorists. Resolution 2370 from 2017 further calls for measures to prevent terrorists from acquiring weapons, including IEDs and their components, reinforced by subsequent resolutions and the UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. Within this framework, CTED supports the Counter-Terrorism Committee by assessing implementation, identifying gaps and trends, and facilitating targeted capacity building with partners. Our analysis consistently highlights the evolving use of IEDs, especially in regions affected by terrorism and organized crime. In Eastern Africa, the threat remains acute. Terrorist groups exploit porous borders, weak controls over precursor materials, and gaps in coordination and information sharing. Increasingly sophisticated IED tactics, including the use of commercial technologies and unmanned systems, require more coordinated and comprehensive responses. The CTED UNOCT cooperation has advanced implementation of Resolution 2370 from 2017, including through practical guidance and engagement with member states and partners. National consultations in Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda, alongside regional engagement, identified country-specific challenges, gaps, and good practices. They underscore the importance of whole-of-government and whole-of-society approaches, stronger legal frameworks, improved border and custom controls, enhanced information sharing, and regional cooperation while ensuring compliance with international law and human rights. The project under discussion today responds directly to needs identified through CTED's assessments and consultations, including the most recent committee's assessment visit to Somalia in 2025. This project reflects a practical, partnership-driven approach to strengthening national capacities, enhancing regional cooperation, and translating commitments into tangible results to counter terrorist use of IEDs. As threats evolve, sustained multilateral cooperation remains essential. CTED is committed to working with partners to promote effective, rights-compliant, and sustainable approaches to countering IED threats. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Castor, for your valuable insights and also for CTED's commitment and continued partnership through the years in supporting member states' implementation and rebel security council resolutions. I welcome now His Excellency Mr. Yavesh Oreni Monari, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Kenya to the United Nations, to deliver his remarks. Yep. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Kenya is honored to host this discussion with Canada in collaboration with the United Nations Office of Counter-Terrorism, the Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate, and the United Nations Mine Action Service. The theme of this year's City Week, A Future Free from Terrorism, consolidating the global commitment to multi-stakeholder approaches to counterterrorism through member states' leadership and action, reminds us that achieving a future free from terrorism depends on a strong member state leadership reinforced by effective multi-stakeholder cooperation. Today's discussion is a practical reflection of that shared commitment. The continued use of improvised explosive devices by terrorist groups serves as a reminder that terrorism is constantly evolving. As terrorist tactics become more sophisticated and accessible, our responses must evolve just as rapidly. Countering the IED threat, therefore, demands more than technical expertise or national preparedness alone. It requires sustained political commitment, strong regional cooperation, and partnership that enable member states to participate emerging risks, anticipate emerging risks before they become wider security challenges. For Kenya, today's event represents an important continuation of a process that began earlier this year in Nairobi, bringing together policymakers, practitioners, and technical experts from across East Africa. The regional consultation provided more than an opportunity to exchange experiences. They created a shared understanding that challenges confronting our region require corrective responses informed by local realities and supported by international cooperation. They also demonstrated the value of placing member states at the center of developing practical solutions to shared security concerns. One of the clearest lessons from those engagements was that effective counter-EID efforts cannot be built by individual institutions working independently. They depend on strong national coordination, trusted regional partnership, and sustained collaboration with the United Nations and other international partners. Equally important is ensuring that our responses remain firmly anchored in the rule of law, respect for human rights, and the meaningful participation of all sectors of society. These are not parallel objectives. They are mutually reinforcing foundations of effective and sustainable counterterrorism. Today's discussion is an important opportunity to translate the insights emerging from our regional engagement into practical action. By exchanging experiences, and highlighting good practice, we can strengthen national capacities, deepen regional cooperation, and reinforce the partnership necessary to address the terrorist use of improvised explosive devices in a coordinated and sustainable manner. Kenya remains convinced that durable success against terrorism will be achieved when member states lead, supported by strong multilateral cooperation and inclusive partnership that harness the expertise of governments, regional corporations, regional organizations, the United Nations, and other relevant stakeholders. That vision lies at the heart of this year's City Week and continues to guide Kenya's own engagement in advancing international peace and security. As we commence today's deliberations, I encourage all participants to engage openly, exchange experiences, and identify practical opportunities for cooperation. I am confident that today's discussion will reinforce member states' efforts, strengthen the partnership that underpin effective multilateral action, and contribute to our shared aspiration of a future free from terrorism. I thank you all.
Thank you, Excellency, for your remarks and also highlighting the leading role of member states in countering this threat, as well as the support of the international community. I welcome now the pre-recorded remarks by Ms. Jaya Saraswati, Director, Counter-Terrorism and Anti-Crime Programs, Global Affairs Canada.
C'est un privilège que d'être ici avec vous. It is an honor for me to be with you.
Colleagues and partners. C'est un privilège que d'être.
So it is a privilege to be here with you for this important side event jointly organized by Canada and Kenya in partnership with the Office of Counter-Terrorism of the UN, UNOCT, as well as the Executive Directorate of Counter-Terrorism, the CTED, as well as the UNMAS.
And unfortunately relevant for many nations in Africa and beyond. Terrorist use of improvised explosive devices, IEDs, is escalating, inflicting ever greater harm on civilians, and our collective response must match both the scale and increasing complexity and sophistication of this threat. Terrorist exploitation and indiscriminate use of IEDs undermines security, destabilizes communities, and obstructs sustainable development in regions already struggling with fragility and conflict. Nous saluons la détermination.
So we commend the determination of our partners with the UN to continue together, as well as our colleagues from Eastern Africa that came to New York for this side event.
Appreciation to Kenya for co-hosting this event with Canada. Today's event is a testament to the strong partnership between Canada and Kenya on counterterrorism. I also want to express our gratitude to UNOCT, CTED, and UNMAS for their partnership with Canada to address the growing issues of IEDs in the East Africa region. Today's side event provides a strategic platform to examine practical findings emerging from national capacity consultations and a recent regional expert meeting that are essential to strengthening our collective response to the terrorist use of IEDs. I am confident that your discussions today will help us refine effective approaches to preventing and responding to IED threats in line with international obligations and the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy. Terrorist groups increasingly rely on IEDs as weapons of choice, continually adapting how they source, manufacture, and deploy them. The growing use of weaponized unmanned aerial systems by terrorists further compound these risks and demand our urgent collective attention. Across East Africa, national authorities and regional partners have identified persistent gaps in legislative frameworks, regulatory controls, and operational capacities. Addressing these challenges requires sustained commitment and a willingness to learn from one another. Strengthening legislative frameworks, enhancing law enforcement capacities, and improving interagency coordination are not abstract goals. They are essential pillars of an effective counter-IED architecture. Equally important are upstream and downstream measures, from regulating precursor materials and securing supply chains to ensuring rapid responses, forensic investigations, and post-incident recovery. These measures must be grounded in a human rights and gender-responsive approach with meaningful engagement with affected communities. Le Canada est fier de...
Canada is proud to continue and contribute in strengthening this, the capacities of stakeholders facing this threat. And this, the UNOCT, UNMAS, and CTED, we are providing support to the government of Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda to strengthen their resilience, operational level as well as institutional level, facing the use of IED for terrorist activities. This initiative aiming to strengthen capacity for these countries as well as they can counter IED activities, as well as intervening thanks to these instruments in improving the capacity for any investigation, strengthening coordination among these entities, as well as efforts to widen their scope of intervention at regional level.
Earlier this year with all three partner countries. These discussions engaged a wide range of national institutions responsible for counterterrorism, law enforcement, border control, and IED mitigation. Building on these national level consultations, a regional expert workshop brought these perspectives together and identified a set of common cross-cutting challenges across East Africa. This collective analysis underscored the importance of strengthening interagency coordination and enhancing regional cooperation to address the transnational nature of IED threats. Preliminary findings pointed to shared regional needs, bridging the gap between international obligations and domestic implementation, modernizing and consolidating national regulatory frameworks, improving operational readiness and forensic exploitation capacity, strengthening interagency cooperation, and enhancing structured regional collaboration. À l'avenir, c'est
In the future, it's with pride that Canada will continue to provide support to this project, which is contributing to this next phase of the activities, capacity building and technical support, which will be adapted to the context after this side event. The discussions that are taking place here will enable to improve and set up priorities in view of the next sessions to provide capacity building at national and regional level in Kenya, in Somalia, and Uganda.
a shared understanding of effective and context-specific approaches to countering terrorist use of IEDs informed by experiences from East Africa. Canada remains committed to working closely with our partners to translate these insights into sustained practice impact, and we look forward to continuing collaboration to advance these shared objectives in countering terrorist use of IEDs. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you.
And I would like also to acknowledge the presence of our partner, Courtney Black, here with us today, which is like a key component for our project and our great partner. We will now close the opening remarks session and move to the national and regional perspectives. So this is the second segment of our program, and we will hear from national and regional perspectives on current challenges, lessons learned, and opportunities for enhanced cooperation. To bring the perspective from member states, we will hear from speakers for Kenya and Uganda. I welcome Mr. Kiviego Keegan, Director General, National Counter-Terrorism Center, Republic of Kenya, to deliver his intervention. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I am pleased to join you to share brief reflections on national capacity consultations and regional expert meetings convened in Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda, co-facilitated by UNOCT and UNMAS with the gracious support of Canada. At the outset, I note with satisfaction that these engagements have been instrumental in advancing our common resolve to deny Al-Shabaab and other terror groups their preferred tool of disruption. The widespread acquisition and deployment of improvised explosive devices by terror groups have fundamentally reshaped the security architecture of East Africa. Once considered a secondary tool or crude weapons of opportunity, IEDs have evolved into primary tools of asymmetric warfare for groups like Al-Shabaab and Daesh affiliates across the region. Today, IEDs no longer static roadside bombs meant simply to disrupt movement of convoys. They are deeply integrated into rising warfare. They serve as kinetic keys to blast through fortified perimeters, as defensive instruments to hold strongholds, and more importantly, as tools to wage a war of attrition on the psychological resilience of both the security forces and the civilian populace. Ladies and gentlemen, the interventions undertaken within the region over the past year have yielded timely and substantive outcomes, causing a paradigm shift in our approach to degrading the threat posed by terror use of IEDs. Acknowledging the transnational nature of the present IED threat, our countermeasures have evolved into a coordinated, practical, and sustained response that is member state-driven and solutions contextualized to address regional operational realities. The shift has laid the foundation for a more resilient, adaptive, and locally sustained regional counter-IED frameworks that strengthen coordination and is more effective at disrupting increasingly sophisticated IED networks. Our discussions in Nairobi brought several critical regional challenges to the forefront. Chief among these are the uneven regulation of explosive precursor chemicals across the East African community, divergent post-blast forensic practices, and information sharing protocols that remain overly reliant on informal networks rather than institutionalized mechanisms. Addressing these gaps will require continued cooperation, harmonized standards, stronger regional partnerships, and sustained political commitment, which are areas we have prioritized. Indeed, building on the consensus established during the Nairobi workshop, we hope to elevate the trilateral engagement between Kenya, Uganda, and Somalia into a regional mechanism for technical cooperation and the exchange of good practices, which we aim to develop in close coordination with UNOCT, CTED, and UNMAS. I also wish to highlight key outcomes of our engagement, which we hope shall inform the structure of this regional mechanism. First, a robust national coordination mechanism anchored in a designated focal institution, which brings together all relevant agencies and promotes strategic coherence. Second, blending comprehensive national consultation with regional expert dialogues to ensure that our commitments remain grounded in operational realities and seamlessly adapted to regional contexts. Third, layered and sequential capacity building programs to build institutional memory and foster sustainable long-term capability development. We are confident that these building blocks will transition our regional mechanism into an adaptive, self-sustaining security arrangement capable of outpacing the evolving transnational threat of IEDs. Distinguished colleagues, Kenya expresses deep gratitude for this initiative and the positive outcomes it has generated. The progress we've made together affirms the power of multilateral action, yet it also reminds us that the task ahead is urgent and unfinished. We therefore look forward to sustaining this momentum, strengthening our partnerships, harmonizing standards, and enhancing our coordination so that together we deny terror groups their tools of disruption and secure a safer, more resilient future for our region. I thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gingham, for your remarks and giving us a closer look to the situation in the country and the region, and also going through challenges, gaps, but most importantly, in common solutions and sustainability for the future. We take note of all your points, and we look forward to keep cooperating with you. I now welcome Mr. Haruna Bariso Ronde Dere, Isavirye, Assistant Inspector General of Police, Permanent Mission of the Republic of Uganda to the United Nations, to deliver his intervention. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues. Uganda is honored to join this important discussion, and we also thank UNOCT and the partners, Canada and Kenya, for convening just to confront one of the most lethal and destabilizing threats facing our region, the terrorist use of improvised explosive devices. Plainly speaking, at the outset, IEDs remain the most adaptable, accessible, and deadly weapon of choice used by terrorist groups in our region. Groups such as Al-Shabaab, ADF, Islamic State in Central Africa province, they're responsible for severe harm, loss of life, grave human rights violations, and continue to rely on IEDs to destabilize societies, undermine governance, and terrorize civilians. Uganda condemns these acts. The threat is not distant. It is here, real and active, and it is evolving. Therefore, no country, whether in the East African region or elsewhere, can claim insulated against this threat. Across our region, IEDs are used to strike civilians in markets, transport hubs, target security forces, and even peacekeepers, and to disrupt critical infrastructure. These attacks are enabled by porous borders, illicit trafficking of precursor materials, online dissemination of bomb-making instructions, and movement of radicalized individuals across jurisdictions. Uganda has experienced this threat directly, including the tragic attacks in Kampala, the latest being in November 2021. These incidents reinforced the hard truth. The IED threat is regional, and therefore our responses must also be regional and beyond. Uganda continues, just like during the last regional meeting, to share the several lessons drawn from our operational experiences, including threat strengthened detection and response capabilities through specialized counter-IED units, canine detection teams, bombs disposal squads, and improved forensic investigation capacities, as well as community engagement. These investments have prevented attacks in many instances and also saved lives. We emphasize the importance of interagency coordination. Uganda's security forces now operate under joint command structures with shared intelligence, harmonized standard operating procedures, and integrated response mechanisms, which have significantly improved our national readiness. We also underscore the need for tighter regulation of precursor materials. Uganda has strengthened controls on importation, transport, and use of explosive materials and precursor chemicals, as well as dual-use dangerous chemicals. But as stressed during the workshop, the national regulation alone is insufficient when supply chains cross borders. Unharmonized laws, regulations, and policies remain a challenge. Uganda is increasingly leveraging technology, digital forensics, surveillance systems, and data-driven risk analysis to detect and disrupt networks involved in IED facilitation. We acknowledge the valuable support provided by UNCCT and other international partners. Their trainings, equipment, and technical assistance have strengthened our operational capabilities and enhanced our ability to respond effectively. However, beyond national efforts, multilateral cooperation is just not an option. It is the only viable strategy, given the transnational nature of the threat. A bomb assembled in one country may be detonated in another. A radicalized individual may be trained in one jurisdiction and deployed in another. Precursor materials may be sourced from multiple countries. The reality of countering IED threats demands real-time intelligence sharing, not occasional exchanges. It demands harmonized legislation, synchronized watch lists, and interoperable border management systems. It demands joint trainings and exercises that build trust and interoperability among our forces. It also calls for strong support for peacekeeping missions. Uganda's personnel in Somalia face daily IED threats. Strengthening the counter-IED capacities for troop and police contributing countries is therefore essential to mission success and the safety of peacekeepers. Uganda firmly believes that regional leadership must come from within the region. We therefore propose several actions to strengthen our collective response. First, we should establish a regional counter-IED coordination mechanism under any structural arrangement. This platform would coordinate trainings, harmonize SOPs and facilitate secure intelligence sharing. We also should develop regional precursor control frameworks that includes a shared database of high-risk chemicals, unified licensing laws, regulations, policies, procedures, and joint inspections of supply chains. Third, we must strengthen border security through technology, expanding biometric systems, cargo screening technologies, and integrated border management platforms. We should enhance forensic and post-blast investigation capabilities by pooling resources to establish regional forensic hubs to support complex investigations. We must also promote community-based prevention. Communities are the first line of defense. Empowering local leaders, strengthening early warning networks, and countering online radicalization are essential components of a comprehensive strategy. We must expand standardized high-quality counter-IED training for all personnel deploying in peacekeeping missions. Uganda welcomes continued leadership of UNOCT and UNSCT. We encourage partners to scale up technical assistance tailored to regional needs, support implementation of global counter-IED capacity building programs, invest in research and innovation, including detection, technologies, and robotics, and facilitate South-South cooperation. We also urge partners to support sustainable long-term capacity development, not just short-term trainings. Uganda remains fully committed to strengthening national capacities, supporting regional cooperation, sharing lessons learned, contributing to peacekeeping, and upholding international law and human rights in all counter-terrorism efforts. We stand ready to work with all member states and partners to confront the IED threat with determination, unity, and leadership. Excellencies, terrorist use of IEDs direct attack on safety, dignity, and future of our people. Our response must be equally direct, coordinated, and uncompromising. Uganda stands ready, fully and actively to play its part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank you, the representative of Uganda, for your very insightful remarks and highlighting multilateral cooperation is not an option, but necessary. We also take note of your proposals and regional solutions, and we will certainly take this very seriously within the project. We will now move to our last speaker from this session. I'm pleased to give the floor to Mr. Idris Munir Lalali from the Director of the African Union Counter-Terrorism Center. Sir, the floor is yours.
Allow me to express my appreciation to the government of Canada and Kenya, as well as UNOCT, CTED, and UNMAS for convening this important discussion on one of the most persistent and evolving manifestation of contemporary terrorism, the use of terrorism of IEDs. IEDs remain among the deadliest tools employed by terrorists across the African continent. Their low cost, adaptability, and devastating impact continue to make them a weapon of choice of many of these groups seeking to maximize casualties, undermine state authority, and disrupt economic activities. While today's discussion focuses on Eastern Africa, the challenge is continental in nature. Terrorist organizations continue to refine their use of IEDs, integrating them into increasingly sophisticated operational doctrines. Since I'm coming from the AUCTC, allow me to share with you some of the statistics. In 2025, Africa experienced nearly 6,000 terrorist attacks, of which around 1/3 involved the use of IEDs, averaging almost 6 IEDs attacks every single day of the 14 terrorist attacks registered on the African continent. The current situation in 2026, and in particular the first quarter, is not different from 2025, which demonstrate that terrorist groups remain resilient and operationally active. Let me then come back and zoom in into the East Africa region, since it's the subject of this side event. And let me start with Al-Shabaab, one of the most ruthless, I would say much sophisticated groups on the African continent when it comes to IED. At some point, They were developing their own training manuals. They were developing new methods and techniques and developing the tools that make them so efficient in developing IEDs. They were even entering into capacity building of some groups and in other parts of the continent, including Boko Haram at some point in the past history. So IEDs expertise in manufacturing and employing IEDs remains central to this threat. In Somalia, the group continues to employ every imaginable IED. They even reached a point of having animal-born improvised explosive devices. And I was very surprised to see that they were, putting bombs or IEDs on the backs of donkeys and letting those donkeys pass checkpoints, military checkpoints. Against security forces and government positions. In Kenya, attacks along major transport corridors demonstrate a deliberate strategy of disturbing mobility, trade, and public confidence. The impact of IEDs is therefore measured not only by casualties, but also in their ability to generate instability, displacement, and long-term economic disruptions. Distinguished participants, the African Union has identified at least 4 persistent challenges that continue to hinder effective CIED, our countering IED efforts. First, terrorist groups continue to exploit porous borders and weak controls over explosive precursors, detonators, and dual-use materials, including the use of fertilizers, believe it or not. Second, intelligence and information sharing mechanisms remain uneven across national and regional levels. And even if intelligence reaches the recipients, sometimes the recipients have difficulties in understanding the information that they receive. I'll give you an example. In West Africa, there was a country that sent an early warning alert to a neighboring country and saying explosive devices or materials are going to cross the borders. However, the information was either not complete or not well understood by the country, the neighboring country, and it was 2 trucks of fertilizers in that case. And they let the 2 trucks of fertilizers cross the borders without being hindered or interrupted, which now were received by IQIM at that point in time in northern Mali and were able to use in the manufacturing of explosives. So this is one of the examples about, we talk about intelligence sharing, but we don't really focus on the quality of the intelligence that we share. That's one, and how that information and intelligence is interpreted or received on the other end, and how it's being acted upon. Third, many member states continue to face capacity constraints in areas such as detection, neutralization of explosives. Your Excellency spoke about post-blast investigations, forensic exploitation, and intelligence, technical intelligence collections. Fourth, and perhaps the most important one, is the rapid evolution of terrorist tactics is increasingly outpacing institutional responses. It's quite clear that they adapt quite quickly, learn even from failed attacks and failed techniques. They perfect their mechanisms and system, while our approaches, our reactions really take weeks, sometimes months. If it's not years, even in the presence of early warning reports. And I have many examples that I can state, but for the sake of time, I'll save you the pain of having to go through these examples. Commercially available drones, artificial intelligence applications, encrypted communications, and digital financing mechanisms are lowering the barriers to entry for terrorist organizations. The challenge before us is therefore no longer simply countering IEDs, it's countering the growing convergence between terrorism, technology, and transnational criminality. More importantly, terrorist groups are increasingly integrating IEDs into more sophisticated operational concepts. What was once a theoretical concern is now an operational reality. In the central Sahel, terrorist groups have already demonstrated the ability to employ unmanned aerial systems for surveillance and attack purposes, including the delivery of explosive payloads. We all remember, I think, one of the attacks by ISWAP that was filmed in Niger, where that was the first use of IEDs for surveillance. But my team and I had sent a report to member states and saying it's a question of time before they can, perfect the delivery or use the drones as a delivery system for payloads. And this is actually what's happening in the Sahel. and it continues to be, I would say, managed in a perfected manner, that nowadays we are not only seeing one single drone being used or weaponized, but actually a fleet of drones targeting positions of military and defense forces in Western Africa. 20 years ago, terrorist groups generally required direct physical access to their targets. Today, commercially available technologies increasingly allow them to project effects across greater distances with greater precisions and lower operational risk. And this is also challenging a few concepts that we all usually use is border security or cross-border security. Nowadays, a terrorist group could deploy or attack or organize a successful attack without crossing borders. And this is the dual use of technology that is putting a lot of new challenges to how we function and collaborate and cooperate across regions. This fundamentally changes the operational environment, and it requires a corresponding evolution in our prevention, detection, and response frameworks. Excellencies, these developments underscore a fundamental reality. First, no state can effectively confront IEDs threats in isolation, and in particular as we integrate or they integrate more and more use of technology. Second, the response must be collective, regional, and international. And this is, yes, your idea about the platform, the Counter-Terrorism Regional Coordination Platform, is something that the new action plan of the African Union is indeed working on. We've actually created, through some of the training programs that we run, a small network of experts and a small platform in which experts can exchange between themselves, then interrogate one another on how to approach a device, the signature of who manufactured the device, also to enable us to identify the expertise that is crossing countries, but also moving from one region to another to assist these groups in manufacturing these explosive devices, are some of the things that we are working on from an African Union perspective. We continue to support member states through strategic analysis, information sharing, early warning, and again, the challenge here is turning early warning into early reaction. And most of the time, they receive reports but do not necessarily work or act upon those reports until an incident happens. And then they start scratching their heads and realizing that, oh, they should have paid attention to that, and they should have taken the right measures and put the right measures in place and develop the right capacity. We're also heavily involved in capacity building, both at the AU CTC, but at the level of the AU Commission through our Peace Support Operation Division, which are gradually involved in, I would say, terrorism theaters. So we are enhancing our level of readiness to deploy troops in terrorism, I would say, theaters. In that respect, we are helping the PSOD to develop counter-terrorism CT units, within which we will find also counter-IED units to be deployed in peacekeeping and peace enforcement missions. Second, looking ahead, the African Union believes that 4 priorities deserve particular attention. First, strengthening indeed real-time intelligence sharing and information sharing. Second, enhancing control over explosive precursors and dual use of technologies, including fertilizers. And then with this Africa Free Trade Zone, I think those controls and a mechanism and a system of exchanging information, cross-border information between the services that are concerned of border security is quite important in that respect. Investing in sustainable national counter-IED capabilities. And then fourth, developing a dedicated AU-UN partnership on emerging terrorism technologies, including drones-related threats and integrated counter-IED and counter-UAS capabilities. Excellencies, the lessons from Africa's experience is clear. Terrorist groups adapt quickly. They cooperate across borders and increasingly exploit emerging technologies. That's a given. Our institutions, legal frameworks, and operational responses must evolve at the same pace. The future challenge is not merely explosive devices themselves, but the convergence of explosive emerging technologies, as I said earlier, and transnational criminal networks and increasingly sophisticated terrorist tactics. Through strong continental cooperation, enhanced regional mechanisms, sustained national ownership, and robust international partnership, we can deny terrorist groups both the materials and the operational space they require to employ IEDs and other emerging means of attacks. In doing so, we will not only strengthen countering terrorism efforts, but also advance peace, security, development, and resilience across our continent. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Idris, for this very good presentation and for giving us the perspective and analysis from the African Union Counterterrorism Center, the continental challenge analysis, the 6 IED attacks per day in 2025. Also, the practical examples are very welcome. And I think this also gives us a very good transition because you mentioned hybrid threats and the convergence of different technologies. And we are now going to move to the next session where we're going to talk about this. Of course, these interventions have highlighted that the need for comprehensive responses that combine legislative measures, operational capabilities, interagency coordination, and regional cooperation. This is the common denominator in all the statements. So now we're going to move to the experts' presentations from the UN side of the House. So we will have, before I move into giving the floor to CTED, I would like to mention that in 2017, the Security Council unanimously adopted a resolution 2370, which called all states to eliminate the supply of weapons, improvised devices, and components to those involved in terrorist acts. For a more detailed overview, my good friend from CTED, Mr. Jean-Philippe Morange, Senior Legal Officer at the Counter-Terrorism Committee, the Executive Director, will brief us and illustrate us on what CTED is doing. Thank you, Jean-Philippe.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, dear Maria, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear delegates, dear colleague. I'm grateful for the opportunity that is granted to me to on this workshop on the strengthening multilateral cooperation to counter terrorism, use of IED. I think our privileged partnership, the UNCCT and the UNMAS, as well as Canada and Kenya. The use of IED for terrorist purposes by terrorist extremist groups is increasing, sadly. If West Africa is strongly impacted regarding persisting acting in the East African region, like groups like Al-Shabaab and other groups that are using IEDs as one of their main tactical tool. They're using it not only against military targets, but they are humanitarian actors, we have civilians, and public spaces and public infrastructures. The increasingly use of IED as well as material, double utilization of these materials by terrorist groups are complicating the tactic and the strategy for intervention. The assessment and evaluation by the CTED within Eastern African countries showing that there are many shortcomings and challenges that still existing. First, accessibility to the precursor that they're using to make this IED still facilitating attacks. We have insufficient and poor regulatory measures, and the terrorists are using materials outside any regulatory framework. Second, at national level, in terms of technical expertise, this forensic capacity, equipment, capacity for post-explosion investigation. Third, borders vulnerability. As it was mentioned earlier, the poor interagency coordination, and this allows cross-border circulation of materials. To conclude, the fourth point, the IED utilization, let me underscore what was mentioned earlier. These are using many types of material, like even drones, like remote detonation systems, All these strategies, all these tactics requires adapted response strategies, quick sharing of information and intelligence, especially on traffics and emerging threats, regional interoperability, including training and coordinated operations, legal and regulatory frameworks that will be harmonized as regarding precursors and how to handle all these materials.
African Union Counter-Terrorism Center remain essential in connecting national efforts and supporting capacity building. Several lessons stand out across regions. Next slide, please. Through the UNOCT-led counter-terrorist use of weapons program, we jointly promote a comprehensive upstream and downstream approach. Upstream or prevention, through stronger regulation, border controls, and engagement with industry. Downstream, effective response through post-blast investigation, forensic, and criminal justice. Equally important are whole of government, whole of society approaches, ensuring coordination across agencies and partnerships with the private sector. These practices demonstrate that integrated and prevention-focused strategies deliver the most sustainable results. In this context, CTED plays a key role in supporting member states and partners. Through its assessment and analytical work, we help identify priority gaps and needs, which directly inform capacity building efforts, including those delivered under UNOCT programs. CTED works closely with UNOCT and other partners to facilitate targeted technical assistance, tailor to national and regional needs, promote good practices and knowledge sharing across regions, support the development of comprehensive, coordinated, and sustainable counter-IED strategies. This collaboration helps ensure that capacity building efforts are strategic, demand-driven, and aligned with evolving threat dynamics. The IED threat remains adaptive, transnational, and complex. Addressing it requires closing key capacity and regulatory gaps, strengthening multilateral cooperation, scaling up proven practices, and ensuring sustained, coordinated capacity building support. CTED remains committed to working with member states and partners to advance practical, effective, and coordinating response. Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
And sharing with us the key challenges in countering the IEDs threat, but also the approach that we're promoting together, and we have disseminated in more than 50 countries, so also in the East Africa region, so upstream and downstream measures on countering IEDs and other weapons. So now I have the pleasure to also invite my dear colleague, Ms. Alma Pinto, Program Management Officer at UNCCT OCT, to share the key findings and effective practices emerging from the consultations and regional expert meeting that happened in Nairobi and was mentioned by several speakers. The floor is yours, Alma.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you so much, dear colleagues, for attending this meeting with us. We are very much aware of how many things are happening in parallel. We, as the UN, are always pushed to ensure that we have gender representation, but talk about African representation in this session and the famous African solution for African problems. I, as Maria has mentioned, am part of the UNCCT's Countering Terrorist Use of Weapons program. So we work quite extensively in both non-conventional and conventional side of the weapons. We collaborate very closely with our colleagues from CTED, from UNMAS, but in this particular case, with the 3 member states on the eastern side. You will notice around the tables that we have really invested significant effort in engaging other member states, not just from the eastern side, but also from the western side. Many speakers have mentioned, and I believe Mr. Idris specifically mentioned that the coordination between Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram is quite fluid, and there's effective practices to learn from them as well. My colleagues later will speak about some statistics, and they will mention that this challenge is not just on the eastern side. It just so happens that today, generously, Kenya, Uganda, and Somalia are the ones from whose experience we are learning and sharing with other member states. I will not go through the information about the threat because it has already been mentioned by many speakers. We are all very much aware that this is their weapon of choice. It's used on a daily basis. My colleague JP and I believe other speakers as well have mentioned the aspect of the weaponization of the UAS. Every day you learn something else. We thought that those are the new technologies, but today I've learned that the animal-borne device is the most emerging technology. So you live, you learn. It was also mentioned that the crucial response is to have a strategic approach and to focus not just on defeating the device, but also eliminating the supply chain. This is something that has come up in all of the national consultations. This is something that has come up in the regional engagement as well. So perhaps for those of you who are not familiar with the project itself, I can just mention a few pieces of information. This is a project that we started with implementing with Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda late last year. So far, we have managed to organize jointly with the CTED support, with UNMAS support, and obviously being hosted by our partner countries. We have organized 3 capacity consultations and a regional meeting where we discussed most effective practices. You will notice here that our main stakeholders are not just the response units, but that we are also looking with the guidance of the member states, of course, who have shaped up the project itself, that we are looking into our natural counterpart, which are the counter-terrorism agencies, but also law enforcement and criminal justice practitioners, because it is important to address all of these different pillars in order to reduce their capacities when it comes to IEDs. Some of the most effective practices that emerged during our discussions, not just during the national capacity consultations, but also specifically in the regional engagements. We have outlined some of them. Something that came out quite strongly was the importance of a designated national coordinating authority. And it is not important just having an authority, but it's important also for this authority to be equipped with a very clear mandate, with adequate resources and sufficient authority to steer and to coordinate the efforts and the national response to IED threats. Furthermore, the discussions also highlighted the value of a formalized interagency coordination arrangements, bringing together law enforcement, intelligence, defense, security, customs, other relevant actors that play a role. I believe our colleague from Uganda has also mentioned community. Community is a very important part of this because you, as the government, cannot have your eyes and ears everywhere, but the community is everywhere. So having that strong engagement with the community is also important. Another recurring message was the need for reliable and for sustainable mechanisms for the timely information exchange across national, subnational, regional, and even international levels. Participants also emphasized the importance of standardized information management practices, including common reporting formats, sound digital forensic procedures, and consistent approaches to evidentiary handling. Furthermore, there are many recommendations. We discussed for 2 days, and we needed even more time. But presently, we are limited, so we are sharing some of the key ones. But we will be glad to distribute later on, with the approval, of course, of Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda, of the recommendations and the effective practices document that will be produced. The workshop itself also highlighted a value of early prosecutorial engagement in terrorism-related investigations, including where is also feasible prompt attendance of the IED incident scenes. Kenya in particular highlighted this on numerous occasions, the crime scene management and close collaboration with the prosecution. Participants also underscored the importance of disciplined crime scene management and the preservation of the evidence, including safety protocols, contamination prevention, and also preservation of the chain of custody of evidence. Participants drew attention to the importance of stronger international legal cooperation. I believe in one of these discussions, it came out that Somalia and Kenya, for example, do not have extradition arrangements. And so this was a common goal for all of us to work on together. This would include also mutual legal assistance and extradition arrangements. As I've mentioned, there's many recommendations, but we will not go through them now. If the moderator will allow me, for those of you who are based in New York, with the support of African Union, we are planning on holding a briefing for the member states, obviously primarily the ones of the African Union member states, but we will also extend the invitation to the other countries and share the more information about the work that we are conducting jointly. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alma, for your presentation, for walking us through threats, strategic approaches, multi-stakeholder, multilateralism, but also the key findings of this important regional meeting, where I would like to highlight that the importance of having a coordinating entity, interagency arrangements, standardized information management processes, and of course the prosecutorial and also the crime scene management and legal, international legal collaboration. So I think these are all valid points, and we will continue to work within the project to move forward. Now we move to our speaker from the United Nations Mine Action Service, which is the technical lead within the United Nations system for developing standards and safety when handling explosives, and also good practices for safe handling of IEDs and explosive components in high threat environments. So UNOCT is looking forward to this partnership with UNMAS in the implementation of the project, and I'm pleased to give the floor to Mr. Raymond Kemei, Peace Operations Support Lead, IED Threat Mitigation Advisory Team, UNMAS. The floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, thank you so much for inviting UNMAS to be part of this important side event. I will provide an overview of IED threat in Africa, and also I will go specifically to the IED threat along Kenya-Somali border. UNMAS has a program in Somali, so we keep track of the IED incidents in Somali, but also along the common border. From the open source data, you can see on the slide from armed conflict location and event data, presented here, demonstrates a rapidly evolving explosive threat across Africa. And this data has also been highlighted by Mr. Idris, but this data shows from 2021 to 2025, the explosive ordnance threat in Africa is increasing by approximately 76%, which is driven mainly by IEDs and lately with the emergence of weaponized drones by non-state armed groups. Two regions are highlighted. 80% of the IEDs are in West Africa and East Africa, and the top countries are Somalia, Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, and Nigeria. Next slide. I will now focus briefly on the IEDs along the common border of Kenya and Somalia. Border regions remain most vulnerable to IED threats due to limited state presence, porous borders, and weak cross-border coordination. This slide illustrates UNMAS recorded IED data for the last 10 years along the Kenya-Somali border. The red markers shows where IEDs detonated and exploded, while the green markers, which are few, indicate devices have been detected and safely disposed before they could cause harm. Increasing the green is what is UNMAS' objective, because it reflects improved intelligence, search capabilities, and preventive action. Most of the incidents recorded in Somali's lower Juba and Gedo region, with the threat extending towards Kenya counties of Mandera, Wajir, Garissa, and Lamu, where IEDs are primarily placed along the main supply routes, also mentioned by the Kenyan delegate. This pattern is not unique in Kenya and Somalia, but it is replicated across many border regions affected by terrorism and violent extremism, where non-state armed groups exploit governance and security gaps to move personnel, weapons, and explosive material. Addressing this challenge requires regional approach, as mentioned by all the speakers. Member states should strengthen cross-border coordination, intelligence sharing, law enforcement coordination, and border security. Next slide. To summarize, and I think this is also highlighted by Mr. Philip, based on the consultation and also Alma mentioned, the consultation from Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda, UNMAS and OCT has identified a number of comprehensive whole-of-government approach to strengthen national counter-ID capabilities. This proposed program is aligned with the UNIDIR counter-ID capability maturity model, which is shown on the slide. Going forward, we are proposing to have both upstream and downstream measures highlighted, which will strengthen prevention, supporting national legislation and policy, enhancing control over ID precursor materials, improving security, and building intelligence-led capabilities to detect, disrupt, and prevent ID attacks before they occur. And on the downstream side, UNMAS will work with member states to strengthen national capacities in explosive scene management, which we've done in other countries. We have a program in Libya where the police have been trained on that. Post-blast investigation, forensic exploitation, and information analysis. These capacities will enable authorities to identify perpetrators, analyze ID trends and networks, and also generate actionable threat assessments. Lessons learned from each incident are systematically fed into prevention, creating continuous cycle of improvement. We intend that this program will target police, investigators, border and custom officers, prosecutors, and judicial officers. From our previous intervention, UNMAS has provided good support to the military because of their deployment to Somalia, and also we provided support to Somali security forces. But this project will enhance the capacities for the Somali security forces, but in Kenya and Uganda, it will focus mainly where the gaps are being identified. By strengthening these capacities across the security and criminal justice sectors, member states will be better equipped to prevent attacks, disrupt terrorist networks, and uphold rule of law, and build on long-term resilience against evolving ID threat. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ray, for sharing your presentation and walking us through statistics and also a closer look to the border between Kenya and Somalia, and bringing up also, again, the upstream and downstream measure approach for prevention and response, and again, for this successful partnership with UNMAS and CTED. So we're now moving to the closing remarks session. I would like to thank all the speakers and participants for the valuable contribution. And I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Mauro Mierico, Director of United Nations Counter-Terrorism Center, to deliver the closing remarks. Mauro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria Eugenia, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear colleagues. As we conclude today's event, I would like to express really my sincere gratitude to the governments of Canada and to the Republic of Kenya, as well to all of our partners from CTED, UNMAS, the African Union, and all participating member states and experts for your valuable contributions and engagements. Today's discussion reaffirmed that the threat posed by the terrorist use of improvised explosive devices remains a serious and evolving challenge. Across regions, terrorist groups continue to adapt tactics, exploit new technologies, and seek opportunities to acquire the materials, knowledge, and resources needed to manufacture and deploy IEDs. The IED threat remains multifaceted and is rapidly evolving. Beyond the immediate security implications, terrorist use of IEDs continues to inflict devastating humanitarian, social, and economic consequences, affecting civilian populations, disrupting critical services, and undermining stability and development. At the same time, our discussions have also demonstrated that effective responses are within reach. Strengthening legal frameworks, operational capacities, information sharing, and regional cooperation, while promoting the exchange of good practices, remains essential to addressing evolving IEDs threat. The experiences shared through this initiative, including the consultations and the regional engagements in Kenya, with the participation of Somalia and Uganda, highlighted several practical lessons. And these include the importance of strong national leadership and coordination mechanisms, effective interagency cooperation, all of government and all of society approaches, timely information sharing, and closer links between national, regional, and international efforts to address IEDs. The experiences shared through this initiative underscore the importance of investing in prevention, preparedness, and partnership. But they also demonstrate the commitment of member states to advancing collective efforts to prevent terrorists from acquiring and using weapons and explosive materials. At the Counter-Terrorism Center, we remain committed to supporting member states in strengthening capacities to prevent and counter the terrorist use of IEDs and to enhance cooperation at the national, regional, and global levels. Let us continue to build on the momentum generated through this project and also through today's discussion. This initiative, I think, has really clearly demonstrated the value of partnership among member states, regional organizations, and the United Nations. And we encourage all of member states to build on this model and perhaps replicate similar approaches in other regions facing IED-related threats. I really want to thank all of you for your attendance and have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mierico. I now invite Ms. Rita Gunayari T. Lubis, Deputy Director of UNMAS, to deliver her closing remarks as well. The floor is yours, madam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, to echo my colleague Mauro, as we conclude today's event, UNMAS extends its sincere appreciation to the governments of Canada and the Republic of Kenya for their leadership in convening this important initiative. We also thank our partners from CTED, OCT, the African Union, and all participating member states and experts for their valuable contributions and commitment to strengthening collective actions against the threat posed by IED. Today's discussion, as we all heard, have reaffirmed that the terrorist use of IED remains one of the most significant and evolving threats to peace, security, and sustainable development. Addressing this challenge requires sustained partnership, strong national institutions, and a coordinated whole-of-government approach. UNMAS remains committed to supporting member states in building sustainable counter-IED capacities. And just to provide a few examples, in Somalia, UNMAS has worked alongside the federal government of Somalia, the African Union, and international partners to strengthen national institutions through policy support, technical assistance, threat analysis, and the development of specialized counter-IED capabilities for Somali security forces and African Union troops contributing countries. These efforts have contributed to Somalia's security transition and strengthened resilience against explosive threats. Beyond Somalia, UNMAS continues to invest in regional capacity development. Through our partnership with the International Peace Support Training Center in Kenya, Nearly 170 instructors from 17 African member states were trained in 2025 to assist in developing search and detect capacity within their national training institutions. And in terms of impact, these trained instructors have been able to train personnel deploying to peacekeeping missions, reducing time spent during the in-mission training. While in 2026, this support has expanded to strengthen counter-IED capabilities for police personnel from 7 African countries. And additionally, at the continental level, we talked about this earlier, in partnership with the United Nations Office to the African Union, UNMAS has supported the development of the African Union Mine Action and Counter-IED Strategic Framework for 2026 through 2030, helping establish a coherent policy framework to address explosive threats across Africa. So looking ahead, UNMAS will continue working closely with UNOCT, CTED, African Union and member states to translate lessons into practical action by strengthening operational capabilities, supporting criminal justice responses, as well as adapting to emerging threats, including the use of weaponized unmanned aerial systems. We appreciate the support being provided by the Government of Canada in developing counter-IED capacity within East Africa. Together, through sustained cooperation and shared commitment, we can build more resilient institutions, strengthen regional security, and reduce the impact of IEDs on communities across East Africa and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lewis. So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us. We hope that the discussions will contribute to strengthening cooperation in the region, but in the continent as well, sharing practical solutions and supporting member states in their efforts to prevent and respond to the terrorist use of improvised explosive devices. This concludes our event earlier. So I thank you very much for your presence, and I wish you a very nice continuation of your day. The meeting is adjourned.